It began with a letter, a plain, yellowing envelope with no return address, mailed to a grieving mother in Manhattan in 1934. She hesitated, fingertips trembling as she opened it, unaware that what she was about to read would forever destroy any remaining hope she had left. Inside was a neatly folded note, typed in an almost polite tone, but the words were soaked in horror. The anonymous writer confessed to luring her 10-year-old daughter with promises of a party, and eating her. Not just killing, eating, piece by piece, slowly. As the camera lingers on the faded words of that letter, a chilling voice reads it aloud. I cooked her little body and ate it. It was sweet and tender, like roast veal. The letter would become one of the most infamous in American criminal history. And its author? A name that still haunts the darkest corners of true crime, Albert Fish. Albert Fish did not look like a monster. He looked like someone's grandfather. Small, soft-spoken, and polite. Gray hair, sad eyes, a worn-out suit. But behind those tired eyes lived something far more sinister. Something ancient, primitive, predatory. Born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., Fish's early life was a study in madness. His family tree was infested with mental illness. Relatives confined to asylums, voices in their heads, bloodlines soaked in delusion. His father died when he was 5. His mother, unable to care for him, placed him in an orphanage. There he met pain, and he liked it. He was beaten daily by caretakers. The beatings made him bleed, and the bleeding made him feel pleasure. By 10, he was already spiraling into sadomasochism. A child addicted to pain, self-harm, and confusion between suffering and desire. The worst part? No one noticed, no one stopped him, and no one imagined that this boy would one day become a killer. By his early 20s, Albert Fish was a quiet man with a quiet job house painting. He married, had 6 children. All the while he lived 2 lives, one for the world, and one for the voices. Fish claimed that God spoke to him, that he demanded sacrifice, that he craved pain. Sometimes Fish would insert needles into his own flesh, dozens of them embedded deep into his groin and abdomen. An X-ray after his arrest would later reveal 29 rusting needles lodged inside his pelvis. Not one of them ever removed. He began to eat raw meat, often serving it to his children without their knowledge. He scoured newspaper ads placed by parents looking to hire or rehome children. He wrote back, pretending to be a wealthy benefactor or a farmer in need of help, but always with a plan. On a spring afternoon in 1928, 10-year-old Grace Budd answered the door in a white dress. Waiting outside was an elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Howard. He had kind eyes and an offer. He wanted to hire Grace's older brother for farm work. But first, he asked if Grace could accompany him to a birthday party at his niece's house. The Budd family, though hesitant, was convinced by his soft voice and calm demeanor. They had no idea they were handing their daughter to a man who would soon become America's most reviled cannibal. Grace never came back. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. The case grew cold until 6 years later when that fateful letter arrived. In it, Fish admitted that there was never a party. No niece, only him, and Grace, and the unspeakable. When the police traced the letter's typewriter, they closed in fast. They found Fish living in a rooming house, alone, quiet, and cooperative. Inside his room were walls stained with decay, and a leather whip, and blood-streaked rags, and a stack of newspaper clippings of missing children. He didn't deny anything. In fact, he confessed with pride. He detailed what he did to Grace, explaining how he killed her with his bare hands, then cooked her organs with carrots and onions like a stew. Detectives sat in stunned silence, their stomachs churning. It wasn't just the crime. It was the way he told it, calm, reflective, even nostalgic, as if he were reminiscing about an old friend. One detective would later say, "I've looked into the face of evil, and it smiled back at me." As detectives combed through Albert Fish's belongings, they stumbled upon something worse than bloodstains or bone fragments. They found a handwritten journal, a diary so grotesque that even seasoned investigators had to step outside and catch their breath. It was filled with vivid recollections. Children he had stalked, meals he had prepared from human flesh, fantasies involving torture and mutilation. There were codes, drawings, lists, entire sections dedicated to self-punishment rituals. He wasn't just a killer. He was an architect of agony, and he believed his suffering pleased God. "I must atone," he wrote. "Pain brings me closer to purity. The children were angels I returned to heaven." He wasn't hiding his crimes. He was chronicling them as if he knew one day the world would need to see exactly what he was. In 1935, Albert Fish's trial began. The courtroom overflowed with journalists, psychiatrists, and curious citizens drawn in by the ghastly headlines. Gray man confesses to eating child. Brooklyn vampire to face justice. Cannibal of Wisteria found sane? Fish pled not guilty by reason of insanity. And here's where the real battle began. Was he mad or monstrously evil and sane? The prosecution painted him as cunning, manipulative, and fully aware of his actions. He planned his crimes. He concealed evidence. He wrote letters to taunt and terrify. The defense argued he was the embodiment of delusion, hearing voices, mutilating himself, convinced he was divinely chosen to cleanse souls through pain. Psychiatrists were divided, but the jury wasn't. The testimonies were chilling. One psychologist recounted how Fish described a delightful tingling when he saw children in pain. Another told the court that Fish believed St. John the Baptist whispered to him in the night, commanding sacrifices. Yet, despite the parade of pathology, the jury couldn't ignore the premeditation, the manipulation, the sheer structure of Fish's madness. He wasn't a man out of control. He was a man in full control, steering toward horror with absolute intention. In a moment of stunning tension, the prosecutor leaned in and asked Fish directly, "Did you feel remorse for what you did to Grace Budd?" Fish paused, then smiled gently. "I felt nothing, only that her meat was tender." Gasps filled the room. The Budd family sat motionless. And in that moment, something shifted. The mask dropped. There was no mystery left, only a monster. On March 21, 1935, Albert Fish was sentenced to death by electric chair. The crowd erupted in applause. Some wept, others cheered. But Fish? He simply nodded, as if the verdict had been expected all along. In the days leading up to his execution, he remained calm, even cheerful. He told guards he was excited to die, that the chair was the ultimate pain, a gift. But then came the final irony. When they strapped him in, the executioner encountered a problem. Fish's body, riddled with metal needles from years of self-torture, caused electrical interference. The first jolt didn't kill him. The second one surged harder. The third finally ended it. It was almost as if his own sadism had armored him, even in death. Old Billy vanished while playing in a hallway with his friend. When questioned, the friend could only say, "The boogeyman took him." The police shrugged it off. Justice was served, but not easily. Albert Fish died in 1936, but his legacy refused to be buried. Books were written, documentaries produced. His story became a case study in forensic psychology, criminal profiling, and the darker capabilities of the human mind. He inspired horror films. He haunted nightmares. And most chilling of all, he reminded the world that monsters do not always look like monsters. They can wear suits, speak gently, smile softly, and still, they can feast on the innocent. The Budd family never fully recovered, but they did something powerful. They spoke publicly. They pushed for changes in how missing children cases were handled. And slowly, painfully, they transformed their grief into awareness. The name Albert Fish may live on, but so does the justice that silenced him. Inside the mind of America's most notorious cannibal, the narrator concludes, "We saw not madness, but choice, evil, and in the end, justice." Before Grace Budd, there was Billy Gaffney. In 1927, 4 months later, Fish confessed to abducting Billy, describing, in horrifically detailed letters, how he tortured and cooked the child. He boiled pieces of him, roasted others, claimed to drink his blood. This wasn't murder. It was a ritual. I took his nose and ears and slit his belly. I drank from the cuts. What makes this worse? Authorities ignored the boy's disappearance for far too long because of his neighborhood, his background. Billy's case never received the same media attention. He was, tragically, a forgotten victim. The press branded him with many names: the Gray Man, the Boogeyman, the Brooklyn Vampire. But none of these labels captured the full horror of Fish. He was a shapeshifter, polite to neighbors, devout in church, loving to his children, then a predator by night. In New York's poorer districts, rumors spread like wildfire. Children were warned not to talk to strangers. If a man offers you candy, mothers would say, "Run. It could be the Gray Man." Urban legends formed. Parents whispered warnings. But what they didn't know was that the legend was real. Albert Fish's crimes weren't just about lust or hunger. They were deeply rooted in twisted theology. He believed that eating children was a holy act, that their purity, once consumed, would cleanse him. He often cited the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, claiming that God stopped Abraham, but told Fish to go further. He wrote, "My sacrifice pleases the Lord. Their flesh is sacred. Their souls rise from the smoke." Fish blurred the line between religious obsession and madness. Was he deluded, or merely using religion to justify his craving for domination and death? Police would later discover that Fish buried human remains in public parks, places where children played, where families picnicked. They dug up small bones, clothing fragments, even a knife, rusted and wrapped in bloody cloth. Fish admitted he liked the irony, the innocence of playgrounds, tainted by the presence of death. "Let them laugh above the earth," he once said, "while beneath them lies what once was joy." His evil wasn't just physical. It was symbolic, deliberate, and deeply psychological. Fish wrote dozens of letters to victims' families. Only one, the Bud letter, reached its destination. The rest were intercepted or never mailed. Some were addressed only to Mother. Others had no name, just the word "confess" scrawled across the envelope. The contents? Terrifying. Descriptions of boiling flesh, of bones cracking, of joy in hearing a scream fade into silence. Historians and criminologists believe these letters were his true autobiography. Not the man he showed the world, but the one he hid in ink and terror. In 1931, a young girl named Mary O'Connor disappeared from Staten Island. Her body was never found. Years later, a bone fragment, a child's femur, was discovered not far from where Fish once worked as a painter. Though he never confessed, some investigators believed she may have been an unconfirmed victim. Fish once said, "There are children whose names I do not remember, but I remember their taste." It's likely that the known victims were only a fraction. One of the most disturbing physical discoveries came post-arrest. Fish's pelvis contained 29 sewing needles he had pushed into himself over the years. They were not visible externally. No one, not even doctors or his wife, had ever noticed. Why did he do it? Fish claimed it was penance. Others say it was masochistic ecstasy, but perhaps it was something darker. A desire to hurt the only person he couldn't escape, himself. After his execution, letters flooded police stations across the U.S. Some claimed to be from followers of Fish. Others sent drawings of mutilated children. A few were clear hoaxes, but others led to real investigations. In Ohio, 2 teens were arrested for kidnapping a boy and attempting to sacrifice him to God after reading about Fish. His story had spread like an infection, warping vulnerable minds and leaving behind a trail of influence that lingered far longer than his breath. Dr. Frederick Wortham, the lead psychiatrist in Fish's case, would later say, "I met a man who brought me closer to hell than I ever want to return." Wortham's professional calm was shattered. He reported nightmares, insomnia, even hallucinations after months of interviews with Fish. Fish didn't just tell him about the crimes. He relived them in vivid detail. And the doctor, forced to listen, was changed forever. Fish had 6 children. Only one ever spoke publicly: Albert Fish Jr. He described his father as odd but loving, that they ate strange food, that he wasn't allowed to have friends over. After the arrest, he realized the truth. The man who tucked him in at night had cooked children in the same kitchen. Fish Jr. moved far away and changed his name. But he once whispered in an interview, "When I close my eyes, I still smell it. The iron, the blood." Criminal profilers today use Fish's case as a textbook example of a ritualistic sadist. Someone who doesn't kill out of impulse, but routine. He groomed, he stalked, he planned. And unlike other serial killers, he didn't want power over life. He wanted power over death. He once said he envied butchers. "They bring silence to animals," he said. "I bring silence to angels." In the final hours of his life, Fish requested paper and a pencil. He wrote a final statement, but when asked to release it, prison officials refused. The contents were, reportedly, too disturbing to be made public. Only one guard leaked a line, "I shall feast with the angels in fire, and they will taste like stars." To this day, the full contents remain locked in the archives of Sing Sing prison. Decades later, a storage room in NYPD's basement was cleared out. A box was found labeled Fish A. Inside were photographs, sketches, fingerprints, and something odd, a small rusted meat hook wrapped in wax paper. No one knows if it was used in the crimes, but it bore a single initial, carved in tiny script, G. Was it for Grace? The file remains sealed. When Fish died, his body was cremated. No grave, no tombstone, just ash. His name remains etched in history, but there is a strange comfort in knowing that the man who fed on innocence left nothing behind to feed the earth. He was erased, silenced, and justice, though late, was final. In a haunting twist, a letter arrived at a local newspaper 2 years after Fish's death. It was signed, "One Who Escaped." It described a time in 1929, a ride with a strange man in a gray suit who offered candy, then suddenly told the boy to get out because God changed his mind. The boy had never told anyone. Until then, "I think he was going to kill me, but something stopped him." One voice, one escape, one ghost from the storm who lived to tell the tale. Albert Fish was a regular churchgoer. Every Sunday, he stood among parishioners, singing hymns and reciting scripture. No one suspected the man beside them was boiling children's flesh in his kitchen. But as news of his crimes broke, a horrifying fact emerged. A priest had once confronted Fish over disturbing confessions. But fearing scandal, the church quietly discouraged him from returning, rather than involving the police. Silence was chosen over justice, a recurring pattern in evil's shadow, institutions protecting themselves instead of the innocent. Years after Fish's death, one of his former boarding house landlords made a disturbing discovery hidden behind wallpaper. A black and white photo of a young girl, around 8 years old, her eyes scratched out with a nail. On the back was scrawled the words, "Too pure to stay." Authorities believe it was one of Fish's unconfirmed victims. The identity of the girl remains unknown, but the message, it echoed the same twisted theology Fish used to justify murder, believing his victims were set free through pain. While combing through his belongings, investigators discovered a small, handmade cookbook. No title, no author, just handwritten pages with instructions and drawings. It appeared innocent at first until they read the ingredients. Liver must be fresh, ideally under 10 years old. Soak in brine for 3 days. Serve with beets and mustard. It was Fish's cannibalistic diary of meals, a cookbook for death. Even today, the book is stored under lock and key at the New York State Museum's Criminal Archives. Albert Fish's wife, Anna, left him in 1917, long before he was known to the public. She cited strange behavior and unexplainable night rituals. She never spoke publicly, but in a letter to a friend, she once wrote, "There were nights I woke up to him standing over the children, just watching. He said he was waiting for angels. I packed my things and never looked back. Her silence may have saved her life and her children's." A construction crew demolishing a Harlem tenement in the 1950s uncovered a sealed basement. Inside, chains bolted to the walls, meat hooks, and a rusted cleaver. When shown pictures, surviving detectives from the Fish case confirmed it was a known property he had painted for years. No bodies were found, but the markings on the floor told a different story. Could it have been a kill room? Some believe this is where many of his unknown victims died. Albert Fish was a painter by trade, a handyman trusted to enter homes unsupervised. But what few realized was that this gave him access to children, bedrooms, schedules, escape routes. He used his job as a disguise. While painting homes, he mapped them, noting where children slept, when they were left alone, which windows were unlocked. A monster in overalls with a brush in one hand and a blade in the other. Before his execution, Fish requested a full-length mirror be brought to his cell. His name remains etched in history, but there is a strange comfort in knowing that the man who fed on innocence left nothing behind to feed the earth. He was erased, silenced, and justice, though late, was final. In a haunting twist, a letter arrived at a local newspaper 2 years after Fish's death. It was signed, "One Who Escaped." It described a time in 1929, a ride with a strange man in a gray suit who offered candy, then suddenly told the boy to get out because God changed his mind. The boy had never told anyone. Until then, "I think he was going to kill me," but something stopped him. One voice, one escape, one ghost from the storm who lived to tell the tale. Albert Fish was a regular churchgoer. Every Sunday, he stood among parishioners, singing hymns and reciting scripture. No one suspected the man beside them was boiling children's flesh in his kitchen. But as news of his crimes broke, a horrifying fact emerged. A priest had once confronted Fish over disturbing confessions. But fearing scandal, the church quietly discouraged him from returning, rather than involving the police. Silence was chosen over justice, a recurring pattern in evil's shadow, institutions protecting themselves instead of the innocent. Years after Fish's death, one of his former boarding house landlords made a disturbing discovery hidden behind wallpaper. A black and white photo of a young girl, around 8 years old, her eyes scratched out with a nail. On the back was scrawled the words, "Too pure to stay." Authorities believe it was one of Fish's unconfirmed victims. The identity of the girl remains unknown, but the message, it echoed the same twisted theology Fish used to justify murder, believing his victims were set free through pain. While combing through his belongings, investigators discovered a small, handmade cookbook. No title, no author, just handwritten pages with instructions and drawings. He stared into it for hours. When asked why, he whispered, "I want to remember what I am." Guards later said he practiced facial expressions, as if rehearsing how to appear sympathetic or divine. Even to the end, Fish performed. But behind the act, all that remained was the reflection of horror itself. Multiple families who knew Fish in the 1920s later reported odd behavior, like him inviting their children for picnics, offering meat sandwiches, or taking them on trolley rides alone. None of them suspected him. He was just Mr. Fish. But years later, those same families reanalyzed everything. The looks, the comments, the strange meat that tasted off. They asked themselves the impossible. Did we eat something? Someone? Fish kept postcards from each neighborhood where he committed crimes. He marked them with small dots, sometimes red, sometimes black. No one ever figured out the full pattern. But when laid out on a map, the dots formed a ring, surrounding the very borough where Gracebud once lived. Was it a symbol, a ritual, or was he encircling his centerpiece? The one he viewed as his final and most perfect crime. A boy, now grown, came forward in the 1980s. He claimed he had once delivered a paper to Fish's home and was invited inside. He was offered a drink. But when he said he was late, Fish smiled and let him go. "I didn't think anything of it until I saw his face in an old book," he said. That smile, it was the same, like a cat who lost a mouse. Another child who escaped by luck. When Sing Sing cremated Albert Fish, they didn't expect a surprise. Among the ashes, workers found small, blackened metal pieces, the remains of his self-inserted needles. One guard refused to touch them. Another claimed the furnace burned hotter than usual that day. Whether superstition or science, it felt symbolic. Even fire had to work harder to destroy him. During the trial, the infamous letter to Gracebud's mother was read aloud. The jury, made up of hardened men, sat frozen. Some cried. One reportedly vomited in the hallway. That moment changed everything. The debate over sanity stopped. It was no longer about psychology. It was about evil. Raw. Undeniable. Witnesses say the electric chair room that day was colder than usual. When the switch was thrown, there was a crackling sound, louder than any execution before. A fuse shorted. The lights dimmed. One reporter whispered, "It sounded like the devil was being pulled back." Even nature, it seemed, reacted to Fish's departure. A forensic psychologist recently recreated a psychological map of Fish's mind using his letters, art, and crimes. They found obsessive loops, phrases and symbols repeated across unrelated writings. Drawings of mazes, always with children at the center. Biblical verses paired with recipes. The conclusion: his entire mind was a cathedral of pain. In 1995, a small memorial was held for Gracebud in her original neighborhood. A plaque was placed, "For Grace, a light stolen, but not forgotten." Survivors, descendants, and even retired detectives stood together in silence. It wasn't just about Grace. It was about confronting the darkness and reclaiming the light. The final words on the plaque read, "We remember because we must. Evil hides in silence. Justice speaks." In 2002, a renovation crew working beneath an old Staten Island boarding house uncovered a child's shoe and fragments of a small femur, buried within crumbling foundation walls. The home was once listed under Fish's former employer. The case went cold. DNA couldn't be matched. But everything, the size, the location, the era, pointed back to Fish. "I never killed two in the same place," he once said. "I left breadcrumbs of silence." The idea that more children lie buried beneath the sidewalks of New York is a weight the city may never lift. Albert Fish painted not just walls but canvases. After his arrest, several crude drawings were found under his bed, most featuring small, faceless figures in cages. Others were darker. Sketches of fire licking skin, of grinning men in shadows, of children dancing in circles with missing hands. Experts debated. Were these confessions in disguise or hallucinations made visible? Some believed they were rehearsals, plans drawn in charcoal before acted in flesh. Fish often spoke in riddles. In letters to the police and victims' families, he embedded numbers, biblical references, and odd punctuation patterns. In 2011, a cryptographer decided to analyze the symbols as a cipher. What she found was staggering. Many letters had embedded dates and initials, too consistent to be random. When cross-referenced with missing child reports, 6 matched known disappearances. These could be the names of 6 victims we never knew existed, until the code spoke. Not all his victims were silenced. Some escaped and lived to carry the trauma. One woman, now in her 90s, recalled an encounter from 1928. She was 10. Fish approached her outside a grocery store and asked for help delivering a package. She followed him until something made her stop. "It was the way he looked at my feet," she said. "Like they were meat." She ran. She never spoke of it. Not to her parents. Not to anyone. Until decades later, when she saw his face in a documentary. Modern psychologists believe Fish exhibited a rare confluence of disorders. Severe schizophrenia, marked by hallucinations and delusions. Masochistic psychopathy, where pleasure is derived from personal pain. Sexual sadism, tied directly to dominance, fear, and ritualistic harm. But one trait overpowered them all: emotional detachment. He didn't kill for rage, or greed, or even lust in its usual form. He killed to feel something. The last night before his execution, Fish spoke with Father Martin Valerio. In a private conversation never recorded, the priest later said, "He confessed more than I asked for. Names, details, laughter, then tears. The priest claimed Fish cried not for the children, but for himself. "I wanted to be taken when I was young," Fish had said. "No one came for me, so I became the taker." Pain, passed down, turned into violence. The cycle of cruelty, unbroken, until the chair sparked. At the New York Public Library, room 319 houses sealed true crime archives. Among them, a locked cabinet containing the original Fish files, letters, photographs, victim sketches, and more. Access is restricted, but one librarian once spoke anonymously, saying, "There are things in there that could poison the soul. You don't read it, it reads you." To this day, the archive remains untouched by the public, a mausoleum of madness preserved in ink. Albert Fish's story has taken on folkloric qualities. Over the years, he's been fictionalized in novels, horror films, underground music, even a comic book villain once modeled after him. This dramatization, experts warn, risks glamorizing evil. Because Fish wasn't a specter, or demon, or creature of fantasy. He was a man, and that's what makes his story more terrifying than any ghost tale. Evil sometimes wears a father's face, a painter's smile, a churchgoer's hymn. A decades-old file marked Grey House emerged from NYPD's cold case room, so named for the nickname of Fish's home. It contained transcripts from neighbors who reported hearing, screaming at night, the smell of cooking hair, a small voice begging to go home. Each report was logged, but never followed up. Why? Because in those days, the word of poor tenants against an elderly white man meant nothing. Systemic ignorance and prejudice left the children voiceless. At the heart of this story is Gracebud, the 10-year-old girl, dressed in white, who trusted the kind old man with a smile. She is not just a victim, she is the soul of this case. Her voice, silenced in 1928, echoes through time. What happened to her cannot be undone. But by telling her story, by unmasking the man who stole her light, we grant her something Fish could never destroy: remembrance. After Fish's death, the Budd family left New York. They never spoke to the press again. Grace's brothers changed their names. Her mother reportedly died in silence, never removing her daughter's last photo from the living room. But their grief sparked a movement. Grace's murder helped bring about tighter child labor protections, background checks for workers entering homes, increased tracking of missing children. Her loss saved others, a tragic legacy, but a powerful one. Why do killers like Fish arise? Experts say it's not just mental illness. It's pain unaddressed, abuse unanswered, society unseeing. Fish was abused as a child, institutionalized, beaten, left alone. This is not an excuse, but a warning. Monsters are not born in hell. They are shaped in plain sight, in homes, orphanages, schools, where no one listens to the screams. Every child Fish harmed was failed by more than one person. A neighbor who said nothing, a cop who dismissed a report, a system that didn't value the poor. This story is not only about Fish. It's about who let him walk among us, and how many like him still do. In recent years, several communities have planted memorial trees for Gracebud and Fish's other suspected victims. These trees don't bear names, just plaques that read, "For the child who never came home, where Fish sowed silence, others now sow roots. Where he destroyed innocence, others grow remembrance." Albert Fish died in 1936. He left no grave, no ashes to scatter, no monument. And that is how it should be. His name may live on in records, but in the homes of those who study justice, it does not live in honor. Because the true legacy is not the monster. It is the light he could not extinguish. It is the strength of the victims. It is the fire of justice, even when delayed, that still burns. After Fish's arrest, forensic experts analyzed his letters, not just the content, but the handwriting itself. They discovered pressure points so deep that ink had bled through 3 sheets beneath. Experts said his pen strokes indicated severe psychotic agitation, especially when referring to grace or biblical punishments. One analyst noted, "It's as if he carved the words into the page." He wasn't writing. He was exorcising something from within. But what? A demon? Or the boy who was once beaten into silence? A small blue envelope was discovered in a locked drawer in Fish's room. Inside were 6 strands of a child's hair, tied with red thread. No note, no name, just silence. DNA testing was impossible then. But one detective held it in his hand and whispered. It's like he kept trophies, tiny whispers of the ones he silenced. A monster doesn't just kill to end a life. He kills to own it, forever. In the 1930s, a young boy's remains were found in a wooded area upstate. Skeletal, jaw broken, vertebrae missing. No one came forward. But one note in the police report stood out. Remains partially cooked. Teeth extracted post-mortem. The case went cold. Forgotten. Unnamed. But in 2007, a retired journalist found the report and a handwritten annotation from a detective. Could be Fish. Could be. But no proof. Just a ghost with no name, no grave, and no justice. Former FBI profiler Dr. Linnea Carlson reviewed the Fish files decades later. She identified a chilling pattern, not in the crimes but in the timing. Every attack happened within 10 days of a full moon, always near water, always following a Sunday. Coincidence? Or ritual? Carlson said, he wasn't disorganized. He was methodical in a way only madness can be. In 1962, homeowners remodeling a brownstone, once visited by Fish, found what they believed was leather nailed beneath a floorboard. But it wasn't leather. It was skin, human, preserved with salt and oils. No identity, no explanation. The coroner said it came from a small child, flayed with surgical precision. To this day, the sample remains unclaimed. Another piece of a puzzle no one can complete. Detective William King, the man who finally caught Fish, was hailed a hero. But in a private journal, later discovered by his grandson, he wrote, I didn't find him soon enough. I have nightmares of bones crying. He blamed himself for not acting faster on early leads, for letting Fish slip through gaps in the system. King died in 1942, but his legacy is one of both justice and torment. Even heroes bleed. Fish once rented a storage shed in Queens under a false name. When authorities raided it post-arrest, they found nothing but layers of insulation, padded walls, and hooks bolted to the beams. It was a soundproof room, a place where no one could hear screams. Nothing was ever proven to have happened there, but the silence inside that shed still echoes today. Among Fish's final possessions was a small leather notebook, burned partially in a stove. Only a few pages survived. Inside, dates, initials, and cryptic notations like green tie, 2 whistles, 1 lamb. One date stood out, June 23, 1926. A boy named George Travers went missing that day. His case was never solved. What did 2 whistles mean? Was it a signal? A game? A death sentence in code? A new family moved into Fish's former residence in the 1970s. Within weeks, they reported strange happenings. Banging noises, whispers, doors opening on their own. They claimed their daughter had dreams of a man with gray hair who said, "Come with me, it's time to go home." They left the house after just 3 months. Whether paranormal or psychological, one thing is certain: trauma stains places. And sometimes it leaves a residue that lingers. In his letters, Fish often underlined certain words in red ink: innocence, lamb, blood, God. No one knew why, until a linguistics professor analyzed the patterns. She found these words always appeared alongside biblical passages referencing sacrifice. Fish wasn't just quoting scripture, he was building his own gospel of horror. Faith twisted, a theology written in flesh and terror. After Fish's execution, his surviving children changed their names and disappeared from public record. But one resurfaced decades later. His son, Gerald, died in 1989 under a pseudonym. In his final diary, he wrote, "I feared my own blood. I never married. I never trusted myself." Even Fish's descendants lived under the shadow of his crimes, as if evil had seeped into the very DNA of their lineage. Before Facebook, before Amber Alerts, there were whisper networks. Parents in the 1930s passed warnings. Don't talk to the gray man. Stay away from the painter with the soft voice. They didn't know his name, but they knew something was wrong. If only those whispers had become shouts. But fear silences, and monsters, especially polite ones, thrive in silence. Found in Fish's home was an annotated Bible, hundreds of pages, marked with comments like yes or good, particularly the book of Leviticus. If a man lay with beast, he shall surely be put to death. Fish underlined that line in red, with the note, or be consumed. He didn't just misinterpret scripture, he weaponized it. The Bible became a scalpel, and his faith a mask for murder. In 2016, a digital archivist reviewing audio tapes from the 1940s heard something strange. One tape was a recorded interview with a Sing Sing guard, but in the background, something faint. A voice, whispering, "She's still in the woods." Audio forensics say it might be an overlap from another tape, or a mistake, or a fragment of a lost confession. The tape was stored, archived, and labeled, "Do not duplicate." The final truth about Albert Fish is this: he was not a phantom. He was not a supernatural terror. He was a man, twisted, broken, and unrelenting in his appetite for suffering. But his story has become more than true crime. It's a warning about what happens when abuse goes unchecked, when silence becomes complicity, when systems fail and monsters walk free. The reckoning is not just in the courtroom. It is in our collective memory, in our refusal to look away, in the way we tell the story, so that it never happens again. In 1999, during the digitization of police archives, a forgotten envelope surfaced in a sealed evidence box. It was addressed to Detective W. King. No postage, no return address. Inside, a note written in Fish's distinct hand, but never seen before. "You think you caught me? You did not. Some I left to be found. Others I kept." And then, chillingly, one waits still, by the river, beneath the second stone. No body was ever found at that location. But the fear, the possibility, it lives on. In 2003, a Fish-owned oil painting was found in an estate sale, hidden behind another framed image. It depicted a small child with no eyes. The painting was unsigned, but experts confirmed it matched Fish's known brushwork. On the back, written in smudged pencil, she screamed in a high note. I called it music. It was auctioned anonymously and then destroyed by the buyer. Some say it was Gracebud. Others believe it was another, never found. A previously unknown witness came forward in a 2012 documentary. A woman in her late 90s who, in 1929, lived next door to the Buds. She recalled something she had never told a soul. The night Grace disappeared, I heard a scream, just once, then nothing, like the air itself held its breath. She told her mother, but no police report was made. Back then, we minded our business. I've regretted it every single day since. Sometimes justice delayed begins with truth finally spoken. In 1937, 1 year after Fish's execution, a janitor at Sing Sing discovered a small metal box behind a loose brick in his cell. Inside, fingernails, stained cloth, and a tooth, tiny, child-sized. The contents were documented, sealed, and buried in an internal report. It never reached the press. But in 2021, the box was unearthed during renovations, and this time retested using modern forensics. The tooth matched a missing boy, Charles Freeman, age 7, reported gone in 1927. He had never been linked to Fish, until now. Fish kept a brass pocket watch. It was always 17 minutes fast. When asked why, he reportedly smiled and said, 17 minutes is how long it takes for the spirit to leave. After his death, the watch was stored in evidence, forgotten. But when re-examined, a hidden panel inside revealed an engraving, microscopic and etched with a pin. 12 plus 9 is equal to 21. Subtract Grace equals 10. Investigators believe this may have been his final body count. 10 children, Maybe more. We may never know. In 2017, a forensic artist reconstructed what fish might have looked like if he hadn't grown old, freezing his image at the height of his crimes. The result? Not a monster. A soft, weary face, tired eyes, a slight, unassuming man. And that is the horror. He didn't look dangerous. He looked invisible. And in that invisibility, he thrived. 3 children survived Fish's grasp, and each one, in different ways, became advocates for change. One became a teacher, pushing for stricter school safety protocols. Another ran a hotline for missing and exploited children. The third worked quietly with NYPD cold case detectives until her death. They never sought fame, but their resistance, their survival, was the crack in Fish's armor. And through those cracks, light finally broke in. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed by electric chair. It took 2 jolts to kill him, his body so laced with needles that it short-circuited the machine. Witnesses said he showed no fear, but the priest beside him said otherwise. His hands trembled. He knew judgment was coming, and when the second surge ended him, the room was silent. Not in reverence, in relief. Albert Fish left behind no grave, no mourners, no legacy but terror. But his victims, Grace, Billy, Francis, and the others, live on in law, in reform, in awareness. Because of them, police procedure changed. Because of them, missing children cases were taken more seriously. Because of them, the darkness has a name, and that name is not forgotten. Albert Fish is gone. The chair ended him. The silence no longer protects him. And though the children never came home, justice did. Evil doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it hides behind a smile, a quiet voice, a polite knock at the door. Albert Fish was not a legend. He was real, flesh and blood, wire and blade, Bible and butcher knife. He was the embodiment of unchecked madness, of pain passed down generation to generation, until someone bled for it. But for every child he silenced, the truth screamed louder. Grace Budd never came home, neither did Billy Gaffney or Francis McDonnell. Their names could have been forgotten, their lives just pages in old case files. But we remembered them. We dragged the darkness into the light, piece by piece, crime by crime, until even the shadows had nowhere left to hide. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears time, memory, a voice that refuses to go quiet. Fish died alone, with the names of his victims etched in silence. And today we speak for them. The monsters we expose can't hurt us anymore, because we saw them, we named them, and in the end, justice did come. Stay tuned for more chilling cases on Cold Case Chronicles, where the truth is always darker than fiction. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Cold Case Chronicles. We dive deeper into the most chilling, unsolved mysteries, and together, we uncover what was left behind. Like, share, and leave a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. Stay vigilant. Stay curious. The truth never rests.